When I first realized that I was going to be a parent, I was super scared. After 2 or 3 weeks of meeting in the home visiting program, I was totally comfortable with the fact that I was going to have a baby. Yes, I was still scared, but at the same time, I felt like I had some sense of strength behind me.
If I didn't have those resources that Jeanette provided me, I think it would be harder now.
I got into the program and I realized, like, oh, this is nice. And now look at me, I work at a family resource center with parents and families, all this stuff.
I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to meet my home visitor, because without her, I think that I would be 10 steps behind from where I'm at right now.
Pero pues aquí pues ya los enseñan un poquito más cosas que uno no sabía. Cómo cuidarla, cómo desarrollarla, cómo educarla, y pues es algo bien, porque pues cosas que yo no sabía, pues ya usted nos las dijo y todo como consejos, y pues muchas cosas que se aprendieron.
I don't know what's normal for a 22-month-old baby or an 18-month-old baby, you know. When we get together, we usually discuss and get some progress made with the baby. It makes me feel comfortable, and I associate my parenting with her, my home visitor, telling me, yeah, this is going great.
So it's nice to know where they're at, what stage they're at for every parent, and also to give, again, your children that head start in education.
If I had any questions with her, just call her up on the phone. You know, it was very relatable, very personal. And, you know, with her getting to know my kids, you know, she got to kind of help guide me along the way. I mean, there were so many cool things that I've learned.
I went from a very rough type of life. I was homeless, and she was able to help me get into school, and I actually have enough credits to graduate with the business degree right now.
The thing I really want to mention, just that I'm grateful that I took advantage, because it's something that has put me in touch with my child, or closer to my child and her development.
I want other people and parents to know that the home visiting is not something that you should be afraid of. It's actually something that is needed.
You know, because she's not just here for her, she's here to help with all of it. She helped me create a safe space where I feel comfortable enough to ask for help.
Don't be afraid to take that step. Like, don't be afraid to get help. It's always okay to have extra support.
I would say, give it a try. You got nothing to lose. It's free. There's some perks, you know. They got some great resources.
Personally, I think everybody could benefit from the home visiting programs.
I realized that my life was going to change dramatically in ways that I did not know or understand or even comprehend. I was going to have to really go to the well and become accountable and adjust to a lot of things differently.
Que queríamos era que naciera, ya quiero tener, entonces ahorita lo que tenemos es aprovecharla, quererla y cuidarla lo más que se pueda.
Creo que a todos nos preocupa la primera vez que nos dicen que vamos a ser padres.
When we started the program, my daughter was about 3 months, and my daughter's 22 months now. Something I love about my child, that she's healthy, she's happy, she knows that she's cared for and loved. Those are some of the things that I wanted to make sure that she had, and she has them.
I'm happy today with my daughter. She's the greatest thing in my life, and I'm glad to wake up and see her. And everything I do it for her.
Sí, bueno, yo también vengo de una familia separada. Creo que por eso también me motiva a estar más presente.
And the first item of business is a roll call.
Okay, Director Crane? Director Daska? Here. Director Navarez? Alternate Director Todd? Director White? And Chair McCourty.
Here. We do have a quorum, and with that, we'll move on to approval of agenda. So I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda, unless you have changes. Motion. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote.
Director Daska?
Yes.
Alternate Director Todd?
Yes.
Director White?
Yes.
And Chair McCourty.
Yes.
And we'll note Director Crane and Director Navarez are absent.
Okay, so next is public comment, and I'd like to introduce the new member of our water community. If you'd like to come to the podium and tell everyone about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Garza Diaz. I am the newly appointed Area Water Quality, Quantity, and Climate Change Advisor from the UC Cooperative Extension Program. I have a doctorate degree in hydrology from UC Davis, where I specialize in water resources management and water policy. I have worked in California, Washington State, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and some other parts in Mexico, looking at the local, regional, and even transboundary basins. Some of the research that I've done is water supply, water demand, sustainable groundwater management plans, water quality, climate change scenarios, and a lot of fun stuff. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm starting to read all of the GSP for Ukiah, so really happy to be here and glad to meet you all.
All right, very nice for you to join us as well. I'm really pleased that we have an in-house water person now for Mendocino County, who's also connected to Sam Sandoval's lab, who I believe was your major professor. Okay, so that could come in extremely handy for us as we work through the many issues that we need more knowledge on water management. Okay, so thank you. So next we're going to have discussion and possible action items on, first of all, item 4A, which is fiscal year 2023 through 2024 budget adjustment. This is going to be interesting because poor Eric has more or less lost his voice, so hopefully we can hear him. And I probably will be the most challenged. So if we can't, I think we have a plan B.
Well, I think we might start with, I'll take the majority of speaking roles on behalf of GSA staff, and Eric can chime in to try and utilize what little voice he has in the critical moment. So I'm happy to take a first stab at presenting this budget adjustment. Let me share screen so we can all pull up and look at the proposed adjustment together. And hopefully this will click through in a moment. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, technical difficulties here. That again. Oh, one more shot, and then we'll just see what happens. Well, we can just talk it through if need be. Oh, you see it on your screen, just not on the overall? There it is. Okay, great. So here's the proposed fiscal year 23-24 budget adjustment. You'll see changes in 4 categories. There is a proposed increase to board and TAC meeting budget, and this is for administrative staff to support increased meetings that are supportive of the rate and fee study, to provide time for the board to fully process and discuss the rate and fee study. And that is an increase of $10,000. That's primarily coming from a budget surplus from fiscal year 22-23. There was $30,000 that was not spent in fiscal year 22-23. And so that would be tapping into those that budget surplus from last year. And then you'll also see some additional funds for rate and fee study support within the administrative budget. You'll also notice a decrease of $15,218 for monitoring and data collection. This would be coming out of funds that were initially set aside for Mendocino RCD for equipment upgrades. I believe Eric can correct me on that. And so those are funds that we believe could be postponed into future years. They're not of critical importance at this time, and so we can postpone those to a future fiscal year. And then you'll notice an increase of $15,000 for technical support. This would be an increase to LWA primarily, and you'll notice those contract adjustments later in the agenda that would be tied to these budget adjustments. And so those increased funds for LWA would be to support the grant application that they submitted, which came in $5,000 over what was initially estimated, as well as for some continuous data loggers to improve the monitoring network that we've discussed at past board meetings. And so those funds, I believe that is, the grant funds will, there is not an adjustment noted here, but the grant funds, while we came over budget on that line item, West Yost and the administrative staffing is not anticipating touching or fully expending the grant writing and management budget line item, and so we believe that would come out of that. So happy to, Eric, if I missed anything, feel free to add, but also happy to take any board member questions about this proposed budget adjustment.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Director Wright.
I'm not comfortable with reducing the monitoring and data collection budget because that's our priority in terms of supporting our modeling that is to be the foundation of sustainability, which question is, are we sustainable? Will we continue to be sustainable? And how do we demonstrate that? And that comes from a model that is supported by enough data to make it usable and believable. So this bothers me. I would rather less reserves and continue the monitoring.
I believe Eric was going to try and respond to that question.
I apologize if you can't hear me very well. This is the best my voice is today. To clarify your concern, Director White, which I appreciate, the reduction in the budget is simply to not fund $14,728 for equipment that would be permanently installed into some of the wells. We don't need that equipment to continue doing the monitoring. We were anticipating doing that to support MCRCD for potentially reducing cost over time, but the importance of having the equipment is not as necessary compared to continuing to do the monitoring that we've been doing. So we're still doing the same monitoring, we're just not spending that money on putting in
So this monitoring is, the equipment is not for like continuous readout? It's for just, so you don't have to drop something down there?
Yes, that was the difference, is that.
So you're still going to get all the data you'd get otherwise?
Yes. Yes.
And we wanted the equipment because?
It would allow expedited sampling and then having dedicated pumps and whatnot in the wells. So it makes the routine monitoring easier and then less time consuming over the long run.
Okay. And I guess guess I'm okay with that.
Well, you bring up an interesting question as to whether or not, or if I'm understanding this right, this is an opportunity for us to somewhat semi-automate some of the monitoring?
Not necessarily automating, but making it so it's easier for MCRCD to collect the water quality samples and the water from the wells without having to utilize another contractor like Plain Tech as a sub.
Eric, Denise might be able to.
But
better
Denise is
comment.
here to speak to that if she would like. Do you want?
Hi, everybody. Denise Woods, Mendocino County RCD. Yeah, yes, to clarify, the equipment was going to be purchased for MCRCD to keep. We were going to get trained on using it so that we wouldn't have to do this twice-a-year contract with Blaine Tech to do the sampling for us. But for a number of reasons, it turns out not to be cost-effective for us to acquire that equipment and to train multiple members of our staff in performing those measurements. We would only be using that equipment and that expertise on these wells in this project. So we did a cost comparison and determined that it makes a lot more sense to not make that purchase of equipment and instead to contract with Blaine Tech, who's quite cost effective, which is what we've done in December. So I know that Eric mentioned that perhaps that would be something moved to a later fiscal year, and we can discuss it more, but I'm not sure that it's anything that the RCD is even going to request in the future. So I hope that clarifies that. We are collecting the exact same monthly elevation data and water quality data, and I have those results. They were a little delayed this year, but we've got them in now, so perhaps at the next meeting we can go into detail on those. But yes, I wouldn't be concerned about any change in the quality or quantity of data that we're collecting.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Are there any other questions from any board members?
All right, are we all clear then?
I'll move the recommended action.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, Director Gasca.
Yes.
Alternate Director Todd.
Yes.
Director White.
Yes.
Chair McCordy.
Yes.
And we'll note that Directors Crane and Navarez are absent.
Okay, now we'll move on to item B, which is the GSA Governance Compliance Assessment. And Eric is going to introduce the topic, maybe? Nope.
I will kick us off, and then I will pass it off to our General Counsel, trying to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. And I'm also
Recording
going to
in progress.
Start recording. Apologies that did not happen until now. So as the board may recall, at the last board meeting, we presented a phase 1 compliance assessment results that our General Counsel had been conducting on behalf of the GSA to assess general compliance with state laws and an assessment of existing GSA policies. And at the last board meeting, staff and council presented kind of the phase 1 priorities. So today council will be sharing 2 resolutions and recommended policies that resulted from those compliance assessments. And I'll leave it to Holly to kick us off, and I believe she'll be introducing some of the rest of the council team.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Indigo. And hello, members of the board, members of the public. It's good to see you. I'm very pleased to introduce to you my colleague at Chronic, Senior Counsel Lauren Bernadette. Lauren has a degree from UCLA. She's previously briefed the California Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court on water and public agency finance issues, including Prop 26 and water rights fees materials. She has a lot of experience at the public agency level for water agencies, including serving as general counsel for water, irrigation, and levee districts. and she had previously assisted me with a similar project. So per our conversation about budgets, at Chronic, we're always looking to have the right people for the job rather than have the most senior people do everything. And so I'm very grateful to have Lauren's help. And also she has really stepped up to help do this for you all in a cost-effective way. So Lauren, I'm going to pass it off to Lauren. She can introduce herself in more detail. But I just wanted to be here to say hello to all of you and let you know that Lauren has taken the laboring oar on this compliance project for you. So rather than do the work twice and have me present it, I'm having Lauren present it. So Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Holly, and hi everybody on the board and everybody in the public. Nice to meet you. As Holly said, my name is Lauren Bernadette, and I have been helping her with a lot of the more public agency general compliance aspects of our representation of the GSA. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm just going to give a quick presentation regarding the 2 resolutions that you see in front of you and the policies associated with them. And if you have any questions about them afterwards, I can take those questions and try to help answer those. So as Indigo and Holly mentioned, the board directed our firm to undertake a general compliance assessment for the GSA to determine areas where the GSA might benefit from adopting policies that would help guide the board members and staff with their decision making. Our office completed that assessment and also completed drafting the policies that we now recommend the board adopt through these resolutions. So the first set of policies in your board packet is attached to resolution number 24-01. There are a few policies, there are 6 policies attached to this resolution. These are standard policies. A lot of special districts especially will have policies like this, especially the local appointments list, conflict of interest code, and code of ethics policies are actually mandatory. So those should definitely be taken very seriously. And as a whole, these policies address the proper use of the GSA's property and resources. So that will be the first policy attached as Exhibit A to this resolution. A document retention and destruction policy, which is attached as Exhibit B to the resolution. A social media use policy, which is Exhibit C. And I'll say on this one, the law regarding board members' use of social media, especially as related to service on public agencies like this GSA, has recently changed. So it's just something everyone should be aware of, especially if you do use social policy or social media. And the fourth policy is the one I mentioned earlier regarding a local appointments list that the GSA needs to complete. That's attached as Exhibit B. A conflicts of interest code, which is attached as Exhibit E, and a code of ethics attached as Exhibit F. So the second resolution is resolution number 24-02, and this pertains only to discretionary spending authority for your general manager. Most special districts have granted their general manager this type of discretionary spending authority so that the general manager can move more quickly to make small purchases that are within his discretionary spending limit. So this is a very normal policy to adopt. It's something we recommend all of our clients have. It's especially useful to boards like this one that don't meet every month because the meetings are more infrequent. The board is just not around to approve actions as often. So having a discretionary spending authority policy really helps the GSA to move more quickly on smaller items that a lot of districts have determined aren't big enough to come in front of the board. So with that being said, that brief introduction, I'm here to help answer any questions that you may have about these resolutions and policies. And as you can see on the staff report for this item, the recommendation is that the board adopts both resolutions.
Any questions from board members? No?
I always have questions.
Of course you do.
Can you give me some examples of purchases that might be necessary for the general manager to be making for this particular GSA?
Sure, yeah, and that's a good question because you guys, this GSA is different than a lot of other ones who would, for example, have an office where they would be buying things like office supplies. So let me just scroll down to the resolution to make sure that I'm reading off the correct paper.
Lauren, do you mind sharing your screen?
Oh yeah, let's see.
And while Lauren is looking for that, I just want to share with you all that Indigo was very helpful in helping us review the Sonoma County Groundwater Sustainability Agencies. There's 3 there that Chronic also represent, and take a look at existing policies. So we were able to very cost effectively revise these policies to be appropriate for Mendocino County and the UVB GSA without recreating the wheel there. So thank you for that.
Okay, so did that screen share work so that you guys can see Exhibit A of resolution number 24-02?
Could you zoom in? Could you zoom in a little bit, Lauren?
Oh, let's see, I'm sure, yes.
Yeah, do like 120. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Okay, so through this spending authority policy, if adopted, the board would be granting the general manager authority to purchase goods or services that cost $500 or less, as he sees fit for the benefit of the agency. So I'm not sure if something like that has come up yet for Eric and West Jose, that would, where something costs $500 or less. But as far as special districts go, this GSA is newer. So just because something hasn't happened yet where that would cost $500 or less doesn't mean that it would not happen. This is, I will say, like this policy is fairly standard, and 500 is actually lower than most districts will go, where there's more day-to-day in-office activity. And the other thing it does, you'll notice, is that if the item or service is $500 or less, the general manager has, under this policy, the authority to execute contracts to purchase such items. So that means that that contract would not have to come in front of the board, whereas now any contract would have to come in front of the board. So continuing on through this policy, any goods or service that costs more than $500 and up to $7,500, then the policy includes a procedure that the general manager would need to go through in order to appropriately include something under this policy. So the general manager would have to solicit quotations from vendors. And it says preferably 2 or more sources. The difference there is, or the reason that it says 2 or more sources, is that with certain types of goods or services, there may only be one appropriate vendor in your area. So it's not mandatory, but it's suggested that he solicit quotations from 2 or more sources. And that has to be done before selecting a supplier or processing a purchase order. And again, that is something that, if approved, the general manager would be able to do that without board action. And so, I'm not out there making purchases for the public agencies who I represent every day. I'm not sure what costs under $7,500. But a lot of times if there's something like a repair part that needs to be purchased, and it's something that, okay, obviously this well needs to be repaired, we're going to bring it in front of the board. If it only costs $3,000 or $1,000, it might not be something that you'd want to call a special meeting for. So this policy can also be seen as helpful to avoid requiring the board to call special meetings just to approve purchases of things like a replacement part for a well that needs to get done. The general manager could see within his discretion, yes, this clearly needs to get done. So I'll go ahead and buy the repair part for this well, and that's done. Yeah, so the upper limit there is $7,500. And again, the difference being that if the good or service is under $500, then the general manager gets authority to execute the contract as he or she sees fit for the district. If it's between 500 and 7,500, then there's a little bit more process for the general manager to go through. And over 7,500, the general manager, this policy makes clear that he must still go back to the board of directors to approve purchases of goods or service. Again, that's if they're over 7,500.
Okay, I understand all that. Let me ask Eric, what things, for example, like a mechanical part on a well, we're working with other people for all that sort of thing. You're not out there replacing parts on wells. So what do you envision actually using this for?
That's a great question, Director White. A good example would be, let's say, the website that we did not too long ago. Sorry, my knee keeps hitting this phone at my leg. So that website was about $5,000 to do the website, right? So that would be an example of that. And let's say we want to do some more extensive update that's beyond our contract, then that would be another example of working with a vendor for like a website update. Another example that I could possibly foresee is, let's say that MCRCD finds that there's some extra thing that they might want to do that is outside of their contract, then this gives me the ability to move on that sooner. But no matter what, in general, I would want to bring this back to the board for your information, so that way all financial transactions, no matter what, are still being publicly and visibly known to the board and within our
Do you think it
backup
would be a
materials.
problem to have it set at 5,000 instead of 7,500?
No, that's fine.
Well, I would feel more comfortable.
And I would expand upon Eric's answer just to deliberately say that any expenditures would have to be within the board-approved budget for that fiscal year. So board approval, it would still fall within a board-approved budget.
So I have a couple questions on it. I haven't thought much about this, but since I serve on other JPAs, who has signature authority, or do we have a checking account for our organization? Who has signature authority for that?
That's a great question. So the GSA currently has an account that is held by the county. So all expenses have to be reviewed by us, GSA staff, and then they're routed to the county. And Amber, who was the previous administrator, she reviews everything, makes the final approval, and cuts the checks.
Okay, so it's going through our auditor controller at that point. Someday we will not be part of Mendocino County's banking system, and I think it's really important to look at signature authority. I also would feel more comfortable on this, that there was a requirement when an expense over $500 is up, is that our staff check in with the chair. That's just a way of being sure that we know what's going on. I understand the part that it's in the budget and everything is good, but I think it would be anything over $500. I think would be useful to also have the chair take a look at what's going on as well. Do people agree?
I think it's a good suggestion, yeah.
Yeah. Because that's still pretty quick. So, it usually, Eric can get a hold of me fairly fast. But, and then we're okay for now with the way our account system is set up with Mendocino County, but when we're on our own, we want to have really clear authorizations for checks that they probably should be double signed. And that's usually a standard practice to make sure that the honest folks stay honest. Is that a problem, do you think, Lauren?
No, I think that's fine, and that is standard. I would recommend that your check signing policy be separate from this particular policy, the general manager spending authority policy.
Okay.
So yeah, it can and should be a separate policy. But the part that you said before about if the board decides to add to the policy before you, to require staff to check in with the chair for any expense over $500, that would appropriately be within the scope of this policy and could be added in with an amendment.
Okay, I would entertain an amendment for that action.
Support it.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, shall we go call vote on that to amend this to include a check-in with the chair of the agency whenever an expenditure is over $500? I can't hear you.
So for clarity, we're amending resolution number 24-02 to add chair consultation with the chair for purchases above $500 and otherwise approve as written. Is that appropriate based off of what we've heard?
Yes.
Except for up to 5,000 rather than 7,500.
5,000 rather than 7,500.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve resolution number 24-02 with two modifications. One, to add consultation with the chair for expenses above $500 and to make the maximum $5,000 instead of $7,500.
Correct.
Okay. Are you ready for a roll call vote with those that
Yes.
amended? Okay. Director Gasca.
Yes.
Director Todd.
Yes.
Director White.
Yes.
Chair McCordy.
Yes.
And Crane.
Oh, and Director Crane.
Welcome.
Welcome. I also, so that was for resolution 24-02. Would we like to return to resolution 24-01?
Yes. Yeah, we can do that.
Are there any questions on resolution 24-01?
I would just like to have the social media part explained to us a little bit.
Lauren, would you be able to expand upon that?
Yeah, certainly. So in 2020, Assembly Bill number 992 put some restrictions on board members and how they could engage in social media as it relates to their participation on the board. And overall, this stirred up a lot of discussion because it's not something that seems very natural to people. You know, if you're just going through Facebook or any other social media platform and liking people's posts or reposting people's posts, but not even saying anything, you wouldn't really think of that as being problematic in regards to your position as a director on a board of a public agency. But Assembly Bill number 992 tightened these restrictions quite a bit. And unfortunately, the language of the final statute as completely passed is not as clear as a lot of attorneys would like it to be. And because it's such a new law, it's still sort of up in the air to see what exactly the fine line distinctions on what you can and cannot do are. So at this point, our office is recommending to our clients that when it comes to social media, which is defined as any internet-based platform where you can have a conversation. So that includes things like Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, all of the social media platforms. You cannot use that platform to discuss anything related to the business of the district. That one is pretty self-explanatory because it goes right along with just the normal Brown Act rules that just like if you were in person, 3 of you could not be discussing, or a majority of the board could not be together discussing district business. This is also trying to prevent a majority of a board from having some sort of discussion either by conversation or by likes. So even if it's just 2 directors having a conversation on a social media platform, the risk that another director could go and see, functionally being a part of the conversation without, even without commenting or liking it, means that the recommendation is just that the directors do not post at all on their social media platform about any business within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency. So that includes anywhere where your opinion about the GSA's business could be viewed by another director. So to read directly from the policy also, if a director creates a communication on a social media platform that relates to the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency, no other director may respond directly or interact with the communication. So responding directly is what you normally think of, where you comment on it. And then interacting with the communication is any form of liking or reposting. And you'll notice the policy is written kind of broad because we just don't know what social media will offer in the future or what it will look like. Right now, we're comfortable and familiar with posting and commenting and liking and different reactions. But we just don't know what will be offered in the future, which is why the language is a little broad. So this policy is just, it's the directors agreeing that they will not be using social media platforms to discuss business within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency.
One at a time, correct? So if we wanted to post something to, like, there's a Facebook page for the first district, I could post that. It's just that Adam couldn't, or any other board members, so that there's no communication, so to speak, between board members on a subject matter via this media.
Correct. Yeah, and that's where it gets tricky too, right? Because there are social media places or social media platforms and pages and accounts specifically for the agency or different districts within the agency, and you can still post there. But as directors, then you just need to be careful and not go and like that post or comment on the post or repost it. And at this point, like, we do acknowledge that our advice is probably a little bit conservative, but a lot of that is because it's a new law and we just don't know how courts will interpret different restrictions on there. So one-way posting is okay, but as a director, you don't want to then go interacting with a post.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on our policies that we have here?
Glenn?
Yes.
I have a concern that it still smacks of a breach of Brown, because everybody on the body could look and see what that person had posted, which in essence is a communication that is kind of not acceptable to Brown. It almost seems that if we're going to post something, the group would have to agree to it being posted before the fact in the public setting.
Lauren, can you advise us on
Yeah,
that?
so I mean, that's one of the difficulties that people are having with understanding and implementing board policies around AB 992. And if there was something that the board agreed on, say at an open public meeting like this one, and the board agreed to something and then posted that, like you said, that's fine. Of course, because of the Brown Act, the board could not, outside of a public meeting, agree on something and then go post about that. Because, like you mentioned, that is a Brown Act violation. The difficulty with this code section and how people just don't know how it will fall is, well, let me take a step back and say that can be another reason to, like, for example, add on to this policy any restrictions that you would want to put onto a GSA specific social media page, if there's something like that, because what some special districts are doing is they don't want opinions to be posted on those pages, on GSA pages. They just want the GSA to say, here's an action that we're taking. Here's a project we're working on. Here's a picture of something we just installed. And they're saying keep it to that, but anything like, like do not post anything that the GSA might say regarding legislation or its feelings about a recent decision the governor made or something like that. So some districts are taking AB 992 and just going a little bit stricter at this point to avoid any sort of perception of Brown Act violation. And I suppose the other thing to make clear also is that just because a post or a social media interaction appears compliant with AB 992 doesn't mean that there's no other form of Brown Act violation. So it can get complicated in that way too.
There's also the aspect of perception.
Exactly.
Because it's not just if it occurred, if the perception that it occurred is held to be what occurred, then we're guilty.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. There's, that could be, people have arguments for both sides on that, and it hasn't gone to a court yet to decide how a court would see that.
This seems to me like a tar baby that we should just stay away from.
That's some districts have certainly taken that approach and in that vein want to be a little bit more restrictive on their directors, and their policy will just read, do not post about or interact with any content related to the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency. And to them, and that's the safest approach to make sure that no matter how the courts come out with rulings about AB 992, that they know they'll be on the safe side. So you do have a choice on being, you can be more restrictive. That's always an option.
For the sake of time, we do need to try to move on to the next support agenda item. So with that, Director McGorty, is there any further questions on Resolution 2401? And
I think so. I'd love to have a First Amendment right discussion with our counselor, but I don't think we have time. So in the interest of time, I'll call for the question for us to approve the recommended action.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, if you do feel that there's more discussion warranted, you're also able to table this for the next board meeting.
I move we table it for the next board meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to table this for the next board meeting. Let's call for the question. Question now.
So we are taking a roll call to approve pushing this to the next board meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
Are
sorry.
you suggesting that it come back as it is and we talk about it some more, or are you
I'd like to have a little clarification of it because, I'm thinking of myself. I include discussion sometimes of this agency in my supervisor's report, which gets published in the our agenda packet for the Board of Supervisors. I want to talk about that. I want a little bit more clarification on this, and we don't have time right now. So let's bring at least this piece back. We could approve the other policies.
Yeah, I would be fine to approve everything but this.
We'll approve the other policies except for this one on social media.
okay, so then
I move that we combine the tabling and 02 in the same motion, same vote.
Second to that?
I'll second that.
All right.
Okay, so we have a roll call to approve Resolution 24-01 without Exhibit C, the social media use policy. Director Gasca?
Yes.
Director Todd?
Yes.
Director White?
Yes.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Chair McCordy?
Yes. Okay, motion carries. We'll go on to item C, which is the CDFW grant application update. Audra.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And I'll just ask Indigo, should I go ahead and share my screen? I will keep this brief.
That would be great. Thanks, Audra.
Excellent. And would it be permissible to give both the GSP annual report update at this time, in addition to the CDFW grant update? And I will keep those brief, and then we can move on to Eric's portion.
Yeah, sure, that would be fine, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So again, out of respect for our limited time, I will keep this brief. I just want to let you know a few things are going on with our technical consulting group supporting the GSA. As you may recall, we submitted 2 grant applications to California Department of Fish and Wildlife in fall of last year. I checked in with staff as of mid-December. They were indicating that we should hear back regarding their final decision, hopefully by early February. So again, these are 2 projects, one related to project management actions we'd identified in the GSP, so source water protection, purchasing some property and partnering with the city of Ukiah, and then also engaging in an integrated interconnected surface water study and groundwater dependent ecosystem study to help improve our understanding of those dynamics within the basin. So again, we're waiting to hear more. I hope that we will have information to share with the board at the next meeting. Also, a quick reminder that we are in the midst of preparing water year 2023 GSP annual report. So again, that's going to cover October 2022 through the end of September 2023. Some of the important information that we are updating and collecting as part of this process is going to include actions that the GSA has taken to further GSP implementation, information from our monitoring networks, including groundwater elevation, and then also thinking about things like groundwater extraction, surface water diversion, how much water we estimate is getting used overall within the basin, and then thinking about any possible changes in net groundwater storage. In terms of timeline, this report is due to DWR by April 1st of this year, so we have a couple more months. We are currently in the process of finishing data acquisition, collection. I want to extend a big thanks to the agencies and partners that have already shared water extraction and surface water diversion information with us. And I know that Beth over at Russian River Flood Control and Water Conservation District is working hard to get those numbers finalized as well. So we're getting close to having the data that we need to update all of our figures. We do have some figures already updated. I was going to share a couple. I will reserve that till a later time due to some other updates that you need to hear about, but we are hoping to have a rough draft together by mid-February. And then we hope to actually share some of the key findings during a TAC meeting that will take place March 14th. We will be coordinating with Eric and Indigo to determine whether we want to share any preliminary sort of key findings with the board in March, but we will make that determination a little bit later on and see what they find is appropriate. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to Indigo.
Oh, question.
Yeah, Audra,
Please.
the integrated surface water study is one of the things that we're grant application for. Can you just, 25 words or less, what is that study exactly? How does it function?
Oh, great. So so we did have a special board meeting. I'll refresh a little bit where we talked about some more of the specifics related to that study. This is going to be addressing one of the DWR staff recommended corrective actions in the GSP determination. So improving our understanding spatially and temporally of interconnection between surface water and groundwater, and then also trying to be more protective of environmental and other beneficial uses. So we're thinking about fish, we're thinking about other groundwater dependent ecosystems by characterizing those more effectively and enhancing our monitoring network accordingly. then getting that information into the model, that is going to be combined with information coming from California Land Stewardship Institute. They have been, they've gotten their grant funding. They will be making some additional measurements and updates. So the hope is combining, if we do get the funding from CDFW, combining improvements in understanding from both CLSI's project and this anticipated interconnected surface water study, we can then further enhance the integrated hydrological model and then run some different types of scenarios that are not being performed by CLSI.
So some of this is actually taking place with collaboration with CLSI.
So I think it's, Laurel, I think that we had talked about integrating some things like fall lug depth, taking some of their data that they'll be collecting, but there's going to be a lot, or the plan is that there would be a lot more data collection that would occur as well and be some other monitoring.
I guess I'm trying to just get an understanding of, without a grant, how much of this is dependent on us continuing to fund something, or can we wait a little longer till we can get a grant, that kind of thing?
So I think in order to pursue a lot of the corrective actions, Laurel, and then I'll pass it to Laurel. We do need funding. That was among the reasons that we included much of this project also in the implementation grants that we submitted to DWR, and unfortunately were not successful in obtaining. And so this is just one avenue to help close some of the data gaps that were identified in the GSP and that again were pointed out by DWR staff in our GSP determination.
Laurel, comment?
Yeah, first of all, Audra, I have to say, neither you or Eric has coordinated with us on this at all. We've never even seen the proposal you put in. So please do not assume that what we're doing is going to be useful to you unless you're going to, perform some kind of coordination before you say that. Secondly, our proposal has nothing to do with regulatory compliance for the GSA. That's not why we wrote it, and it's not what we see as the primary function. So we're not going to be developing anything about where we should be changing the regulation of wells to protect fish, for example. That is not part of what we're doing. We wrote this grant because when we were negotiating with the State Water Board on the complete curtailment of all surface water rights, and they started saying, well, we ought to curtail all the groundwater rights because it's the same water. We said, oh no, and where's the data for that? Where's the basis of this? So that's what this is about, is the relationship between the use of groundwater and its location and pumping rates and depth of wells and things like that, and stream flows in the Russian River. Now, some of that could possibly be interpreted for certain creeks, depending on where we focus the work on the rate of groundwater extraction, et cetera, et cetera. But this is not about answering the question of, does the use of groundwater in Ukiah Valley Basin affect fish? No.
And I should have clarified further. I apologize for that, Laurel. During a former TAC meeting, you had commented that perhaps for example, some of the data that will be collected to pursue the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation grant could potentially be useful in an interconnected surface water study. And that's really what I was referring to. So I apologize for any confusion.
I just don't want, I think it's important for this board to understand that this study you're proposing looks at a very small part of this drainage basin. And hopefully it's not going to be interpreted for all the creeks in the basin because they aren't the same. There's extreme differences between the west side and east side in terms of flows during the summer. And if CDFW is funding this, you can be sure there will be regulations that follow. And, everybody should be aware that that's the way all of this works. And our organization doesn't want to be associated with more regulations on anybody. So please, I'm happy to work with you, but please don't mix us up in this particular approach.
Very much understood, and thank you for providing those comments.
Any questions from directors? Al, are you clear now?
Got my answers.
Okay. All right, so are we done then with our grant application update? Okay. And I guess also we're done with our monitoring and water year 2023 annual report.
So I can add one thing on behalf of GSA staff for the monitoring on water year 2023 annual update. We just wanted to report that all monitoring for this water year has been completed as of December. The RCD completed their monitoring in December, and then also the Department of Water Resources reached out through their TSS technical service support system to do additional free monitoring within the basin this year, and that was also completed in December. So as Audra mentioned, all that data they're starting to gather in preparation for the annual report, but all of the physical monitoring has been completed.
Okay. Questions or comments from directors? If not, I think we're ready to move on to item 5. This is consent items. Request a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
It's just the minutes.
Can't hear you through your
Would you
microphone.
like me to read what's on the consent agenda? Yeah. Of course. So we have the approval of the minutes from the October 12th, 2023 board meeting as item A. Item B, we have the approval of the financial report for quarter 2 of fiscal year 2023-24. Item C is an amendment to the Larry Walker Associates GSA on-call contract. Item D is an amendment to the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District contract. And that is the 4 items on the consent calendar.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Or no, we want to do roll call. That's right, I forgot. This organization does roll call. Roll call vote, please.
Director Crane. I'll circle back to Director Crane. Director Gasca.
Yes.
Director Todd.
Yes.
Director White.
Yes.
Director Crane.
Crane, aye.
And Chair McCordy.
Yes. Motion carries. Okay, now we're at item 6, which is staff and GSA partner updates. Updates from the general manager.
I'll be updating on behalf of Eric. Just a brief update we wanted to share on the status of some of the state intervention proceedings that are happening on some of the San Joaquin Delta or the San Joaquin Valley GSAs. The state has released their schedule for when they are doing hearings for each of the basins that have been deemed inadequate. And the Tulare Basin is the first up, and that hearing will be in April. And just as part of board consideration, we wanted to share how desirable it is to avoid that state intervention process. As their state is developing this process, we're starting to see some of the cost estimates that are associated with state intervention, and the estimate for the Tulare Basin is up to $20 million in state costs in addition to any GSA costs. So emphasizing just how expensive that process can be. And that is all from the general manager at this time.
Well, that's cheerful, so. Yeah. Yeah, I you know, as we look at these essentially unfunded mandates, it's going to be very difficult for some of the farming areas to be able to afford to continue to pump groundwater if that's what it's going to cost. And I really have a lot of fear about the future of agriculture given that level of regulation. But I understand also that we have to start thinking differently about groundwater as not being free. And given climate change and other things that are going on right now, we have to think about this as an investment. And as we go through our discussion today about costs and fees. That's got to be part of what we're thinking about. So anyway, I'm not going to comment further on that. Item B is updates from GSA Legal Counsel. Lauren?
Yes, thank you. So I've just got a quick update for you guys today. And the first one is that this happened just yesterday, so it's fresh off the presses. Governor Newsom released his proposed budget for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. This is not the state's final budget. A revised budget will be released in May, and then the legislature has until June 15th to pass a final budget. So at this point, we're just sort of watching. We're looking out for what's in the governor's proposed budget, because it is important. It indicates where the state may be going with this budget moving forward. So the proposed budget that was released yesterday is clearly trying to address the estimated almost 38 billion shortfall that the state is expecting. And it proposes several reductions in certain programs, including various watershed climate resilience programs, water recycling and groundwater cleanup programs, PFAS support, and dam safety investments. So again, a lot of money that has been previously dedicated to those programs is being rolled back, or proposed to be rolled back. However, the proposed budget does propose $93.9 million in new spending for flood safety efforts. So, and of course, the proposed budget touches many other topics. Those are just the topics related to water that we're starting to keep our eyes on. So on the legislative side, the legislature reconvened its 2023-2024 legislative cycle on January 3rd. So we're now in the second year of the 2-year legislative cycle, which means that you're going to see legislative activity begin to pick up again. And the GSA will want to keep its eyes open for laws impacting groundwater. One specific bill that I wanted to flag at this time, again, it's not final, but it is moving through the committees, is AB 828, authored by Assemblymember Connolly, which, if passed, would allow managed wetlands and disadvantaged communities that are being served by small community water systems to use their average annual amount of water without being subject to fines from GSAs. So additionally, GSAs would not be able to impose extraction allocations that would cut into a small community water system's average annual use if that system serves a disadvantaged community. So a small community water system is defined as a water system that serves a maximum of 3,300 connections. So it's very small. And you know, as you can remember through Sigma and with GSA authority through the GSPs, one of the authorities and powers that GSAs have is to impose extraction limits. And so this bill is trying to curb some of that as it would affect managed wetlands and disadvantaged communities. So the bill a couple days ago passed out of the Assembly Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee, which means that it's not yet law, but it's making progress. And it could still be amended, or it could always die further along in the process. So it is just one to keep track of, because it would impact who GSAs are allowed to impose fines and allocation extraction limits on. So the legislative session ends this year on August 31st. So we've got quite a ways to go, but we're just at the beginning, and happy to keep you guys updated with any of these bills as they relate to GSAs.
Any questions? So I would appreciate any communications if there's bills that might be affecting us, so that we can include it into legislative platform for Mendocino County. We will support your recommendations if there's something that you perceive as advantageous or threatening to us. Let us know so that we can get it into our ledge platform.
One thing I forgot to mention in Lauren's introduction is that she previously worked at Aqua, So
Oh,
the
okay.
Association of California Water Agencies. So she's our point person for that at Chronic, and you sort of get free aqua intel along with the legal service.
Much appreciated. All right, are there any updates from DWR and State Water Resources Control Board representatives?
Yeah,
Dominic?
can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Dominic.
Great. Hi, Happy New Year's. So this was already briefly mentioned, but I just want to say thank you to Eric, Carteret, and Denise Woods for working with my colleague, Nicholas Vadpe, on the TSS water quality sampling. And so that data, we took in December water quality samples, and we've used that to create a water quality baseline. So we looked at a ton of constituents. And eventually that will show up in the water data library. So if anyone's interested in seeing that, just Google DWR water data library. We have a ton of information. And the only other update is with the budget and belt tightening. We're no longer allowed to travel if there is an online option, which won't change much because that's how I've been attending these meetings, but just want to let you know that. And that's all for me. Thank you. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you participating with us. And if we sometimes sound angry about regulations, it's not with you personally, just understand.
Yeah, I don't take it personally, so.
All right. Right now we have an update from GSA Partners on local projects, which is open to all. Does anyone have anything to add here? Nope. Okay. Next is an update on compliance process with Executive Order N2-23. Marlena and Eric.
The only update I have right now is that the county has been working closely with us to move the process along further, and I should have an update within the next month where we're at on that, and we anticipate hopefully in the next 6 months moving forward with the final adoption of a process and bringing it back to the public to get comments before moving forward.
Okay, so this is going to involve actually probably both Mendocino County as well as the GSA, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So my understanding is that the GSA can't really regulate permits per se, but as water extraction affects the GSP, you will comment on potential well permits.
The executive order requires us to look at all well permits that are in the Ukiah Valley Basin, and when we look at those permits, we'll be looking at sustainability, and we are still figuring out the final details of what that might look like before we bring it to the public for more comment.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So kind of finally on updates is the PG&E decommission plan for Scotts and Van Arsdale Dam.
Excuse me, Chair. We have a public comment, it appears, on the last item.
Okay, sure. Let's public comment to caller that ends in 4475. Please identify yourself for the record.
Hi, this is Devin with Mendocino County Farm Bureau. So I think I heard a 6-month time frame. If that was correct, I was just wondering if there's any way that could be expedited. It's been over 2 years, and we've got folks that are stuck in the process. And I know everybody's been working on this, but it just seems like the can keeps getting kicked a little further down the road. So is there a rationale why it's going to be taking another 6 months to get to a point of bringing a draft to the public for review?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we can expedite that, at least from my end. I've been meeting with staff to try to organize, at least sort out the things that really are exempt from the GSA consideration. So I don't know what other things are in the timeline that would push it out that far. So, Holly, do you have something else to add?
Yeah, I would just add, especially since Eric's voice is kind of going, that Eric and I have been working very proactively on this for over a year. And unfortunately, the county needs more staff. Frankly, they have very good staff and they're working hard too. But the GSA has been as supportive as we can in providing assistance and drafts and so on to the county. So I understand your concern absolutely from the Farm Bureau, especially we would like to get this done before the summer. And I would, I feel very strongly that GSA staff has done their part to move this forward as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't think that the GSA is responsible for slowing this down. I think that this is internal to the county council, where sometimes it takes a while for things to find their way through. And I have been talking with both county council and the CEO's office and Marlena to keep this moving. So it's definitely on my radar. So Devin, I hope that we will beat the 6 months. Okay. Any other questions before we leave that? All right, now I'll give kind of the update on PG&E decommission plan for Scotts and Van Arsdale dams. I'll keep this simple in the interest of time. So the big breakthrough for us is that PG&E accepted our proposal to include in the decommission plan to assume kind of ownership of the diversion from the Eel River to the Russian River. And what it means conceptually that they would like to work with us. And we have until March to get this together. PG&E will then finalize their plans for submission in January of 2025. Meanwhile, we formed a joint powers authority with the Sonoma Water, the County of Sonoma, Mendocino Inland Water Power Commission, and the Round Valley Indian tribes to be the owner managers of this diversion, which is going to be known as NERF, which is the New Eel Russian River facility. Thank you. I keep getting confused with NERD, which was the initial acronym for it. But so we were formally pulled out our papers at the end of December. We're going to have our first meeting on the end of January, and we're on our way. It's the first baby steps towards a process that's going to take some time. So PG&E will submit their decommission plans, including the plan for us to take over the facility. We will have to give them an option of and basically a rough design of how we propose to do it. The regulatory agencies will eventually get involved, of course. So the first part is that there will be up to 4 years for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to decide whether they like PG&E's decommission plan. And if they go along with it, then they will tell PG&E, okay, it's a go. And then they will probably take another 2 years to actually really have a full-blown plan about how do you remove one dam completely and part of the other dam, and then deal with all of the sediment that's behind the dam. And probably nothing really gets done for close to 10 years from now, if you want to be realistic about it. My assumption is under that time frame, we'll also have to figure out how do we store water, because the whole nature of water will be very, very different. We will not be dealing with abandoned water from a power plant anymore. We will still have probably 1905 water right. But we'll have to figure out where do we put water for Potter Valley, where do we store water, approximately 50,000 acre feet. It won't completely fit into Lake Mendocino. Do we do groundwater recharge? That's where we come in. There'll probably be some work on that necessary moving into the future. I think that there is some potential for that. And there's generally, we have to come up with infrastructure and operations plans to use this water. we're planning for the next 100 years is the way I look at it, and we're taking our first baby steps towards hopefully being successful in holding on to the ability to transfer water from the Eel River Basin into the Russian River. Certainly our economy and really the health of the Russian River depends on it somewhat as well. So that's what we're facing is going to be a long slog that, you know, before it's all said and done, before everything is finished, I don't know if anybody in this room will still be alive. So water projects move slow in California, and this is, of course, really important to us and our economy, so I hope we're successful. Any questions? Adam, do you have anything to add?
I think you covered it.
The what?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
The only question I have, Glenn, is have they have any proposals at all about the sediment? I mean, that's the hugest issue of all.
About the what?
The sediment and the
sediment. Well, there's one proposal is just let it pulse through. You know, when you look at the total amount of load that we're looking at, based on experiences from is it the Ilwa Dam?
Ilwa.
That's been decommissioned in Washington State. It probably moves along at the rate of 1.5 to 2 miles per year. It'll kind of pulse its way down through the Eel River and into eventually Humboldt Bay. It will be very impactful, but that's part of what they have to do is come up with a silt management plan for how they're going to do that. Do they lower the dam gradually? Do they lower it all at once? So these are all things that have to be considered before FERC is going to say, okay, go ahead. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right, at this point, we have time for director reports. If anybody wants to add anything to the record. Okay, skip over that. Then we have future agenda items.
So for future agenda items from today's meeting, we will in the future discuss the social media use policy that was mentioned within the compliance assessment. We'll bring that back at a future meeting. We'll be discussing the 2023 annual report and then continuing on the conversation that we will have at this afternoon's workshop. We will be continuing the fee study conversations at a future meeting along with future consent items.
Okay, with that, I think we can take about a 10-minute break.
For time considerations, could we do a 5-minute break, Chair?
5-minute break. So we'll be back here in 5 minutes. Okay, if we're ready, we'll now start the rate and freeze study workshop. And it is a little bit before 3 o'clock. And let's see, staff want to kick off, introduce our speakers and
Sure, I'd be happy to kick us off. I'll be continuing to speak on behalf of the general manager, Eric, since he does not have a voice today. So I would be pleased to introduce our Hansford Economic Consulting Project team with Catherine Hansford and Shailene Rollins with Rollins PR, who are our rate and fee study consultants. They'll be kicking us off with this workshop with an update on the fee study progress, and then which is item 10A, and then we'll be moving into item 10B, where GSA staff and the Hansford team will be discussing the projected 5-year cost basis for the fee study. So with that, I'll pass it over to Catherine and Shailene.
well, welcome back, Catherine and Janine. So,
thank you. All right. Well, we are going to start this off by giving you an update on what we have done to date. And then we're going to talk about some of the themes that came out of all the stakeholder outreach that we performed in November and December. And from that, we're going to talk about the key considerations that are shaping the fee structure development and the fee pathway choice. And then talk about general community outreach. So in 2023, the board authorized the fee study to proceed in mid-June. In August, Shailene presented the outreach plan to both the board and the TAC and received input and updated that. Then the engineering group, KSN, which is a subconsultant to HEC, they looked at the 5-year PMAs and provided a cost estimate of that. So a PMA, that's Project and Management Actions. Those are items that are included in the GSP. And so they were tasked with prioritizing those and looking at the relationships between the different types of projects and what made sense to go ahead of another project. And as I said, providing the cost estimates for that. So that was completed in September. In October, we had our fee workshop here. As part of the board meeting, we talked about the goals, talked about the potential pathway for the fee, different fee options, and some case studies and some lessons learned from those case studies. Following that, in the fall, I worked with our GIS mapping team, and they developed an interactive map for me at this point to really work with the data and be able to see visually what data we have, what areas it covers, looking at data gaps, and how reliable the data is. Had a lot of discussions with GSA staff on data that was developed for the GSP as well. So did a lot of research into the data sources that we have. And now that map is complete and is ready for use. So as we move forward, we'll be able to use that map and post it onto the GSA's website. And so people will be able to see what kind of a customer they are in terms of the new fee and be able to figure out about how much they will be paying. I mentioned we did very extensive stakeholder outreach in November and December. We did 2 trips to Ukiah, spent the night. We talked to a lot of groups. Shailene's going to review all of that with you. And then in the November-December timeframe, I worked on compiling all the different data sources that I had received and putting together a master fee database. So this is using the assessor's data. It is using crop data information that we have, well information data that we have, the GSP data, and putting it all together into a workable fee database. That is now complete. And then in December, working very closely with the GSA staff on refining the 5-year cost basis for the fee study, which we're going to talk about in Agenda Item 10B. Moving forward, today I'm giving you this update, but what we're looking for today is direction on the cost basis for the fee study. And then moving forward in February, we are going to be looking at a decision on whether this is a Prop 26 or a Prop 218 fee. And I'm going to present the draft fee structure to you. So that has been largely developed, and I'm really excited to share it with you in February. In March, we've already organized and secured space for the second public workshop, and we will also be presenting that draft fee pathway to the Technical Advisory Committee. And the plan is then, once we've received the tax input and once we have received input from the public, we will come back to you in April with the draft fee study for your review and hopefully acceptance. And then in June at your board meeting, the goal would be to adopt that final fee study. You could actually adopt the fee study in April if you wanted to, if you're ready at that time. But June would be the public meeting and adopting a fee resolution. And if all of that went according to this timeline, then we would be able to put the fee onto the tax rolls for fiscal year 24-25. That work really needs to be completed in July. We finished off in August, early August, and accepted by the Auditor Controller. All right, I'm going to pass this along to Shailene.
Hello. One nice thing about us being the same height, I don't have to mess around with the microphone too much. Thank you all for allowing us to be back. And as Catherine mentioned, we did a lot of stakeholder outreach between October, November, and December, starting with creating a pretty comprehensive database of water providers. You'll see up there environmental, agriculture, farmers, private landowners, etc. And after that list was completed, we reached out to representatives from those agencies and classifications and scheduled meetings. Most we try to do in person, some were done through Zoom, and you'll see that we definitely received some overall common themes that came out of our meetings with folks. Oh. It is? Okay. I thought I had a different order. Anyway, sorry. So tribal engagement, before we go into common themes, we recognize the importance of receiving input, and we did do our best to reach out using various forms, from an introductory letter that came directly from the GSA, sent through proper channels, certified mail, et cetera, and so forth. In addition to that, we sent out invitational emails and left phone messages with various tribal representatives. And then we did another tribe-specific email to each individual tribe and the representatives that we had on file. And I'm going to say that was about 30 or so folks. Again, we did get Giddyville. One of their members contacted us and said that he or another representative would be at our workshop this evening. So we're looking forward to that and having some representation. Catherine, in her meetings with contacting water providers and water agencies, also spoke with Ukiah Water. Ukiah. I said that wrong. Water, apologies. Because again, they are a water provider, and so she did have a couple conversations with them. So overall common themes, we heard this loud and clear in the majority of our meetings, and why this is important is it helps Catherine really think through what needs to be considered in adopting the fee. We heard loud and clear, minimize the budget as much as possible to be able to work within the boundaries of SGMA and the compliance, so that you have enough budget to do the reporting, to do the monitoring, to do the administration of the GSP, and also to do your administrative work as an agency. try to have as little impact on the community in general, that all water users have skin in the game, and so they should pay. And also that parcels with wells, even those that are considered de minimis users, should also be considered in paying for the fee. A lot of folks seem to like the parcel acreage fee, and also for logistical purposes and administrative purposes, we heard that property tax bill was the way to go in terms of processing the fee and collecting the funds. In trying to categorize some overlap from various groups, agriculture definitely does not want to feel in the hot seat for subsidizing a fee, which is fair. Vineyards, which is a large ag use up here, they use very little water. There was some mention that the cannabis farmers up here, they do use quite a bit of water, and if there's a way to collect from them, that we should be doing that. That already the state reporting, the monitoring, and the various requirements that are already in place for agriculture is a lot, and to add another layer of reporting or data management or monitoring would just be very burdensome. And also frustration with state mandated fees, and we've heard that a lot from all the groups that just, they're frustrated with the state. In terms of water providers in the county, it's difficult to pass on fees without having to do rate increases. So from the water provider's perspective, they'd rather see the fee go onto the tax roll and not wrapped up into their own water bills. There is also some thought about, it's hard to want to explain to your customers that they're paying for what-if scenarios when majority of folks don't really understand the intricacies of groundwater and surface water and where their water comes from. They just want it to flow from the tap. And again, more frustration with state mandated fees. So disadvantaged community concerns. I think this is all pretty obvious that Ukiah is already a depressed community, and it is very difficult for even the smallest fee to be absorbed by folks. And there's some rent-controlled housing in the area, and so if you have a fee that you have to pay now as an owner, you can't put that onto your renter. And again, tax roll would be better, or water provider would be better. It depends on who you talk with. The DAC feels one way, the majority feels the other way. There's also some concerns about Mendocino County and their I guess, budget shortfall, and that's going to cause some other additional costs to be raised countywide, and they don't want the GSA fee to be confused with the Mendocino County fees.
Thanks, Janie. All right, so I presented this slide to you back in October. I said, how is the best fee determined? It's based off of available, reliable data, input from the customer base, the resource capabilities of the GSA and the participating agencies, and legal guidance. And that in doing this, we would consider disparities in ability to pay and potential language and cultural barriers. We absolutely have to demonstrate a reasonable relationship between the charge and the benefit received. That is a legal requirement. I'm going to address each of those 4 items on the left side of this slide. First, we'll start with the input from the stakeholders. While we heard quite a bit of opposition to having an extraction fee, we did hear a lot of people say, use the best information that you have possible to imitate extraction in the fee structure. And there are ways to do that, so we are taking that into consideration. To consider a base fee for every parcel within the basin, and that logic being that all of the parcels benefit from the management of the groundwater below them in the basin. All these parcels receive rainfall, and rainfall returns to the groundwater table. And so in some shape or form, every parcel should receive some fee. We were asked to consider a fee for cannabis growers. When I come to you in February, I have a consideration for cannabis growers for you to think about. And to the maximum extent practicable, capture groundwater extraction in the basin that benefits properties outside the basin in the fee. So we do know from looking at the map and where the wells are and properties that are served, we know that there are properties that are served water outside of the basin. So we are considering that in the fee structure as well. And one other thing we heard was that if you can, try and minimize the work for the auditor controller. They've got a lot going on at the county. If there's any way to do that, try to do that. Okay. Spent a great deal of time the last couple of months looking at reliable data as well as available data. One thing we've heard pretty loud and clear is that the well inventory data that's available today is not reliable. The location and the number of the wells, and including the domestic wells within the basin, is not known. We also have found that the extraction data is not reliable and is extremely cumbersome to try to discern. And I have a quote here from one agriculture stakeholder who said, "I extract from 4 different water sources from my well," meaning on paper he has 4 different types of water sources that well is extracting from, and how do you distinguish between them, what is truly groundwater. At this time, the GSP and the annual reports provide the best estimates of groundwater extraction available. I also believe that the data can be augmented for the fee study using reputable data sources. So I think there's an opportunity here to expand on our data sources from the GSP and the annual reports. We can obtain all the parcel data and characteristics of the parcels from the Mendocino assessor. We've received that. And we can look at cropland using a combination of the Department of Water Resources crop mapping data, the Mendocino assessors data, and the Mendocino cannabis license data. So we have some good sources of data to look at cropland. In terms of resource capabilities, we are trying to work on a fee structure that keeps the administration costs of this legally defensible fee as low as possible. And we really want to try to avoid having exceptions in the fee calculations, again, to keep the administration as simple and low cost as possible. We are trying to build a fee structure that means that there is no additional data ask of the GSA customers each year. I think what you heard from what Shailene just said was a lot of people are already doing a lot of reporting. And so we want to have a fee that does not require any more work from those folks. So if possible, the data input for the fee calculation should be obtainable from data sources, databases that have already been compiled and that are updated each year. For example, Mendocino County's assessors data is updated. Department of Water Resources data is updated. The California Public Utilities Commission has reports that are updated each year. And then, of course, the GSA has its own annual reports each year. One other thing that we heard from the water providers is that they don't have the resources to provide us with an annual database of the APNs and the number of connections that go to each APN, which was one consideration for one type of fee structure that we were looking into. In terms of legal guidance, the GSA's Legal Counsel has been attending internal staff level and consultant team bi-weekly discussions. They have not joined us every other week, I should say, but they have joined us as needed, and they do provide us some guidance. The fee structure that is presented to the board will have legal input before we present it to you. And of course, you will have legal opinion available at all public meetings. Yes.
Holly, Eric is asking if you could hear him.
No, I can't hear him. If he wants to use chat or text,
Would
though,
you mind
I'll-
introducing Scott at this point
Yes.
as our legal counsel on this item?
Absolutely. That's why I came on. So thank you so much for that great overview. As explained to the board earlier today, I'll repeat myself in case there are members of the public who are at this workshop but not at the board. Chronic has a deep bench, and we take pride in having specific expertise for each topic so we can make sure that the right person is here for the right job and save you costs. So I'm very proud to introduce Scott Morris. Scott is not only a great attorney, he's actually been my mentor at Chronic, and he was previously our managing partner and the head of our practice group for the Water Resources Department. He's now taken a well-earned step back and gone to of counsel status. He was previously the general counsel for the 3 Sonoma County GSAs, and he led them through, from a legal perspective, through their successful rate and fee studies and adoption. So he's well-versed in the nuances of working in rural agricultural areas. Scott was also a licensed civil engineer and worked on that for 12 years before he became an attorney. So I've asked Scott to take the lead for the legal team to help with the rate and fee study. And Scott, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I'll just say hello to everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Little off topic, but Eric, I feel so bad for you. I had the same issue a couple of years ago, and you'd be surprised how many people were glad that a lawyer, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how many people were glad that a lawyer had lost his voice. So I hope it doesn't last too long for you, but I'm available for any questions you have, either throughout this presentation or through all the other normal means where you have questions and communicate. I will add that I also use a resource we have named John Christie. He is a statewide expert in fees, particularly Prop 218, Prop 26 type of fees. And so I do ask his opinion occasionally on things as well. So it's, and both of us will tell you that one of the issues is that it is a new world when it comes to fees and groundwater issues. So a lot of this is very, very new ground or water. And so it is difficult sometimes to give you an on-the-spot answer to things. We'll do our best, but we also don't want to give you bad information. So occasionally we have to stop and go out and find an answer or give you our best estimate of what it is. So I hope you'll be understanding if that were to occur. But otherwise, it's great to meet everybody and look forward to working with you.
And I will leave you, for cost-conscious purposes, I'm going to leave you in Scott's capable hands now that I've introduced him. Thank you for being here.
All right. So recap, in October, I had talked about the difference between Proposition 26 and Proposition 218. I just want to go over that again with you today. Not that you're being asked for a decision on this today, but just refresh the mind a little bit. The first kind of fee that you could adopt is a regulatory fee. That's what falls under the umbrella of a Proposition 26 fee. And this can fund regulatory activity only. So just to be very clear, that cannot fund ownership of any physical assets. You could not own land or water, and you cannot be operating facilities with a regulatory fee. Another thing that a regulatory fee would require, if you wanted to do this, is to regulate de minimis uses, those domestic wells. And we did hear from our stakeholder interviews that the majority of people are in favor of everybody paying something, in which case, if you do a regulatory fee, you would be looking at regulating them. And that really is passing a resolution that states that you are regulating them, why you're regulating them, and that is something Scott would help you with. So other GSAs have done this. You would not be blazing new ground with adopting such a resolution. This process is a more streamlined adoption process, and it's also more flexible. It's easier to update your fee. So each year you can update your fee as needed. It just requires that you hold a public meeting, that you notice that public meeting, that you provide all the information that's available for the reason why you're updating that fee at least 20 days before you hold the meeting. So there's a few requirements, but they're pretty easy to follow. The key things are that you need to prove that the fees do not exceed the reasonable costs that are being incurred by the GSA, and that the fee bears a fair relationship to the payer's benefits from the GSA activity. So those are the two key things you need to be proving for a legally defensible regulatory fee. The other pathway is the Proposition 218 pathway. This is a property-related fee, and I think a lot of you are quite familiar with this type of process because this is the way that water rates and sewer rates are adopted. So the key difference, a couple of key differences, one of them from the Prop 26 is that it can fund management type of activities, and that means that it can fund ownership of physical assets. You can use that fee for facility operations, for example. In terms of process and implementation, it does require a mailed notice and a protest hearing. It's not a ballot. It is a protest procedure. And that procedure can be halted if more than 50% of the property owners protest. And a little different, you still have to show reasonableness, but a little different is that you also need to demonstrate a cost of service for the different types of customer groups that you serve. But I think what I really want you to understand today is that the fee pathway choice does not affect your fee structure. So we can make a fee structure that you could adopt under either pathway. It's more about the timing and the procedure and what it is you intend to be doing with the fees. Our stakeholder input process has shown greatest support for a Proposition 26 regulatory fee. Reasons being, folks want to minimize the efforts and costs, at least for the foreseeable future. They want to see the GSA performing regulatory functions only, and they would like to see as much flexibility as possible with the fee. They have stated that there are already many capable water providers in the basin, and that any necessary infrastructure to facilitate completion of these project and management actions in the GSP should be owned by existing entities. The Proposition 26 fee does not allow for public protest, but a Proposition 218 fee does. So there were a couple of folks who said, well, isn't the 218 process better because people get more of a voice? And I put consultant note on this slide. It has been my experience in doing many, many rate studies over the years that having a protest procedure does not change the outcome. Boards will typically shy away from fees when they receive a loud and clear message from the public, and that does not need to be a 50%. And in fact, it is extremely rare that you would ever get a 50% protest on a fee. What's more important is that you are doing the outreach and that you are receiving feedback and that people come to your public meetings or at least have the opportunity of being provided ample opportunity to come and say something. At the end of the day, Proposition 26 fee process gives just as much opportunity for people to come and say what they think about the fee as a Proposition 218 fee does. So if you want to ask me any questions on that, please do. But I just wanted to make that very clear, that in my experience, just because you can put in a protest, it doesn't mean it's a less effective route if you could do a Proposition 26 fee. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Shailene.
So just quickly, community outreach to date. We have our first workshop tonight. We are hopeful that we will get some great folks in attendance to give us some input into the work that we've been working on to date. We also did a winter newsletter that served as not only an introduction or refresher to the GSA, it also talked about the rate and fee study, and it also advertised the meeting both tonight and the one in March. That was done in both English and Spanish. We used the assessor's parcel database to make sure we were reaching all registered landowners, in addition to stakeholder email or mailing addresses. The GSA distributed this electronic version as well through its email system, and we were fortunate that the Russian River Flood Control was working on their own e-newsletter that was going out the same day that I asked them to help us out, and they included a little blurb in it about the workshop tonight. There was an ad, and I'm not sure if you saw it. It ran January 4th in the Ukiah Daily paper. Again, it was both in English and Spanish to advertise the workshop tonight. We've developed an FAQ. We also have the fee study webpage is now up and running on the GSA website. And we will be providing Spanish translation at the workshop this evening. So if you can, come to the workshop tonight. It's from 6 to 7:30. So upcoming, we do have, again, another workshop on the 13th. We'll be using similar ways of reaching out to folks and letting them know what is happening and where it's happening. We will continue to do presentations to any groups or individuals as requested about the fee study and its progress. And we will be continually updating the website as well. As it starts to come to a close, we will put a media release out and try to get as much coverage as possible to the actual final fee and how that will be collected, so the general public is aware. And budget providing, we will do a wrap-up postcard in both English and Spanish, and again, send that to the same list as we did to the newsletter. So our workshop objectives tonight are to reintroduce the GSP. Some folks might have come to workshops for the GSP, so hopefully we'll have a little bit of background there. And then we also want to talk about the regulatory requirements of SGMA and of the responsibility of the GSA. We'll review the state of the basin and where it stands with its groundwater resources. And then we'll go ahead and touch on the fee study and the GSP implementation benefits. And then Catherine will also discuss the cost basis options of how this fee is going to be put together based on the budgetary needs of the agency itself. Thank you.
So that concludes item 10A, and I think this would be a good time if there are any board member questions on what Catherine and Shailene have covered up to this point.
Do we need to have your sound on?
On. We haven't determined exactly if it's going to be parcels and acreage or.
No,
That's
no,
to
we're
be
still
determined.
working through all of that right now.
At the next board meeting, and based on the schedule that Catherine provided, is where we would start to consider some of those options.
Just a little commentary. I appreciate the thoroughness that you're taking to ask people what they think, and I think the answers are predictable, but Nonetheless, I think it's important that the awareness of this go out to everybody, and that we keep our affected landowners well informed on the process. So the fact that we're having, hearings and you're sending out mailings are particularly effective. People tend to read them, surprisingly, but I know from my campaign that people read my flyers, so I know that there's a good response from that. So I'm glad that we're taking the time to do those kinds of efforts. Okay. And with no further questions, I guess we can.
No further questions? Okay, we will continue. GSA staff are going to start off this next item 10B and introduce the cost basis. First, we want to just review the GSP and regulatory requirements to provide some context for the costs that were developed as part of this draft cost basis that's before you today. So I will kick us off. And if I miss anything, hopefully Eric will wave his hand and we can get quiet for a moment and he can add in. So just as a reminder for the board, the GSA has completed Step 2 of SGMA compliance, which was developing the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, which was approved this year by DWR, and that was entirely funded by a DWR grant of almost $2 million, or multiple DWR grants of almost $2 million. And we are initiating and have been initiating Step 3, which is achieving sustainability over the next, by 2042. But a fee study was determined to be needed to fund the activities to achieve and maintain sustainability, in part to relieve member agencies from continuing contributions, and due to the fact that the GSA did not receive any DWR SGMA implementation round 2 grant funding. As a reminder, in terms of GSP implementation, SGMA requires that a GSA demonstrate sustainability through the implementation of the plan with an end goal of having a sustainably managed groundwater basin by 2042 and continuing beyond that point. And this is accomplished by submitting annual reports, submitting periodic evaluations every 5 years to DWR, as well as implementing the approved GSP by making progress towards and completing projects and management actions that were identified in that plan. The sustainability goal that was identified in the plan and was developed with the board was to maintain groundwater resources in ways that best support the continued and long-term health of the people, the environment, and the economy in Ukiah Valley for generations to come. So that is our core goal that we are working towards through this effort. And then just as a reminder for the board, the GSA's authorities include charging fees, requiring well registration and metering, limiting extractions, acquiring land, managing pumping of groundwater and interconnected surface waters. But the GSA cannot require meters for residential, low water volume groundwater users. The GSA cannot maintain, fix, or drill a well on behalf of any landowners, make any land use decisions about growth or development, or infringe on any existing water rights. So these are the constraints, the opportunities and constraints that the GSA is working within to achieve that sustainability goal. In order to progress towards that sustainability goal, GSA staff have developed a draft timeline based off of what was included in the GSP of when these actions would be occurring. So you can see here on this GSP implementation schedule, the annual monitoring and reporting, for instance. The timeline starts in 2023 and continues through 2042 when that sustainability goal needs to be met by. And you can see that annual monitoring and reporting would be occurring every year. You have the 5-year GSP updates, which would be occurring on a cyclical 5-year basis. And that's showing a 3-year time frame, so some early prep in those early years and then continuing towards developing that plan, and then you can see some of the other actions that our staff have recommended or were identified within the groundwater sustainability plan, including a strategic action and funding planning, rate and fee study updates, which also occur on a cyclical cycle, tasks associated with addressing data gaps, which include the interconnected surface water and groundwater study that we were talking about earlier with Audra in the context of the CDFW grant, groundwater well inventory and registry study, a voluntary well metering program. So all of those are items intended to address data caps. And then you can see several or a whole slew of project and management actions identified in the various green colors. And those are organized under demand management, recharge, and other tasks, with the projects that would be GSA led in bold. And so all of you board members received a copy of this slide in your handout. Eric.
Just one clarifying comment is that all these projects and management actions that are in the schedule, these came from the GSP, and then some of these are packaged to combine a couple of them into one project. And so all of this is nothing that should be new or considered to be additive from what the GSP has in the GSP. Thank you.
Sure, Al.
Yeah, I think something happened on the way to the forum here. I think it's probably a result of the fact that we created this plan before you guys came on board. So everything that took place up to that point, unless you watched the recordings of all those meetings, could be missed. It was very clear in our discussions in making the plan, and the plan was accepted as it was written, that, well, actually we got some communication, some written communication from Zach. If any of you saw it, all saw it.
I didn't see it, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, it's not a lot, but he probably says it better than I can. And what I'd like to do, because I saw Laura was here on there somewhere, to get maybe some comments from her also, because it was in that formulation where we had a lot of discussions about project and management actions, and there was a great deal of concern about putting on a lot of stuff that was going to have a major cost, as you can see here, into that plan. And the idea was these are things that would become necessary should we find ourselves in trouble, which we would have an answer to that based on our modeling and our data collection. So we gave a high priority to those two things. But those we needed to do. These others would occur if we needed to do them, and we needed to have better data. So just to read you what Zach said, this board previously agreed that we would advance our plan through partnership and careful spending. Our vision was that our partners would take the lead in grant submissions and we would support their efforts. Resulting data sets and research findings would flow naturally into future iterations of our Basin plan. The budget under these considerations abandons these principles. Chapter 4 of our plan states that projects, PMAs, are to be, quote, considered and only, quote, in partnership with other entities. Considered is the key word there. In a 2021 board meeting, we purposefully choose non-committal language with an emphasis on partnership. Nobody at that time even conceived that a future board would lay plans to begin all of these projects, nor did the state DWR require or ask that this board move forward on all the PMA actions. In fact, most of the corrective actions identified in their approval are plan or administrative data clarifications. The one notable exception, corrective action 4, has already been addressed by existing grant work. not exactly sure that's the case after hearing what Laurel said. So I don't think we should be looking at it like all these things need to happen, and here's how they would happen, and here's what it would cost. When I look at the PMAs on our sheet here is what's priorities. We have 2 that are mandatory, and great, those we do. The rest of these are things that I would really be willing to say, let's find out if it's necessary, or we put it on paper. Now, like I said, a lot of what my feeling about this and what Zach is writing came out of these discussions we had in planning of this, and a lot of these discussions, I felt we were in dialogue with Laura. So if she has any comments on this at this point, I'd love to hear them.
Sure. Can I jump in, Eric?
Go ahead, please.
Don't want to make you, Glenn. No, you are capturing, and it's true. I think, I don't think, and Eric or whoever, correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is just a summary. But if you read what is in the column with the GSA who's leading, the GSA is really not planning to lead all these projects. It's pretty much beside the compliance projects and the data gaps that we know we need to kind of respond to some of the corrective actions. But for the others, it's more like going to be a partnership in the same way as we discussed during the GSP. So I don't think that the fee study that is considered is really for implementing all these projects. You know, unless we find a project that has incredibly high chances of success and would solve all the problem for everybody, I think at this point these projects will be more a partnership between the GSA and other entities that may have interest in moving forward. So my reading is things have not changed with respect to the discussion during GSP development. It's still going to be a collaboration between the GSA and other entities. The only project that the GSA is taking on are the ones that are required for really just keeping going, submitting the GSP update in 2027, responding to the suggestion for corrective action, and moving forward with the data collection.
Thank you, Laura. And I would add to that we completely understand and we're working with what was available within the GSP as written, but we also understand that the GSP in the future, different PMAs could be selected or added or removed from the GSP based off of your board direction moving forward. So this is a best guess and best estimate of what a schedule could look like if all of these projects went forward at one point, but that would be up to your board's discretion.
Eric.
The main purpose that I really wanted to convey with this table, and thank you, Laura, for your explanation, that was really helpful, is that this just gives you the magnitude of what could be. It doesn't have to be this way. We could always revise based on the data we get, the model updates, and what that says. And some of these will very likely change. Some of these will be viewed as no longer needed, versus others might be higher priority based on the data and the collection we do. And I think that overall, the ones that we're proposing in our cost basis and what we can negotiate from there, that we are setting ourselves up for identifying what's really important and letting that lead us to what we need to do over the next 10 years from 2030 to 2042 to prioritize what's actually needed versus what's not. And this list will definitely change based on all that.
Well, I understand that. And I guess what I would feel more comfortable with is letting it, right now, what you're saying is pretty much that we have sort of a fuzzy picture and the picture will get clearer. So I would like to wait until the picture gets clearer before we put these numbers out there and say, here's the numbers. It looks like we've got this update on 2027. I would expect that between now and then, we will have gotten a little more focus on the fuzzy picture. And then we can look at how we envision the next 5 years and think about the funding that would be required based on what we see that period. I'm just not comfortable with putting numbers like this out in front of people, saying we're gonna fund this, and we may need to do it, we may not. You can't put numbers like that in front of people, and especially at this point in time when we don't have clarity. So, that's sort of where I'm at on this.
Yeah, I would almost reverse engineer this as opposed to putting everything out there. I'd start with what's absolutely essential and what do we think is a reasonable fee that people can pay, and then start our discussion from that point. And so the other thing that we're facing that's creating a lot of anxiety is NERF. Okay, so we're going to have to pay for an entire new water system. We may have to start charging for that, before we even begin construction, because there's going to be costs associated with it. So, that's another JPA that will be affecting almost the same footprint as the GSA. So I think that's where there's a lot of angst as I talk to people about what are we going to do with this. Those are the concerns. And then let's pile on top of that, not exactly great economic conditions right now in the wine grape business or the pear business, which are really the main economic drivers of our local economy. So these are all things that this is like a perfect storm of bad news. So as with the consultants, keep that in mind, that the way that we want to do this is start with, okay, we've made a lot of progress. We got the organization formed, really first big step. Really massive second step was that we got our plan accepted. So we're doing really, really well, okay, in the game. And so far it's been pretty modestly priced since we've been able to leverage pretty much grant funds on it. Now I got to take the next step, which is actually paying for the continuance of this organization, this agency, and this is the minimum we're going to get by on. This is the minimum data that we have to collect. These are the minimum actions that we have to take. And I think if we do it that way, then it's not so overwhelming when people see this. They go, oh my God, we got to do all this stuff?
Yeah.
We can't possibly shoulder the burden of debt for regulation on this.
Through the chair, if you wouldn't mind if we continue along with some of the slides so we can get to some of these numbers and delve into that. We really want to leave time for to fully consider and dive into those numbers. I'll just fly through. I'm almost done with the rest of these slides from staff. We also just wanted to provide a kind of summary of what we see as future uncertainties that the GSA needs to be prepared for. So we're all relatively aware, and we're using here Lake Mendocino as a proxy of overall basin health, but we're in a pretty strong water year this year. We know that the basin is relatively healthy under current conditions, but with climate change, with uncertainties as to what exactly the NERF will look like moving forward and how that will impact, the GSA needs to be prepared for prolonged drought situations like what happened in 2021 or other reductions in surface water that might lead to increased impacts on the groundwater basin. So just we're all aware of these numbers, but without the Potter Valley project diversions continuing, Lake Mendocino could experience shortages 8 out of every 10 years and would go dry 2 of every 10 years. So it's important for us as surface water patterns are changing to be or potentially changing, could change in the future, for the GSA to be ready for increased uses in groundwater and what that might mean for the basin should those changes occur. So that's the lens that staff is coming at some of these budgeting with that lens in mind is what do we need to do now so that we're ready in the future if some of these changes that could happen occur. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Catherine to, or is these still me? I think these are still me. Sorry. So do you want to do these? Okay, I'll start just as a continuing then as a reminder on the fiscal situation. Member agency contributions are not guaranteed beyond the end of fiscal year 2026. Grant funding is not guaranteed, as we're aware, and we're hearing from council earlier as to some of the state budget picture that might make grant funding even more difficult looking forward. But being financially self-sufficient and sustainable will help maintain local control over the groundwater basin and avoid state intervention, which we heard about some of those costs that other basins are facing when it comes to state intervention earlier. So fees will help fund monitoring and reporting activities that are required by SGMA, updates to the hydrologic model, which is currently functional but does need improvement for it to be fully functional and as good of a tool as it can be for management and planning actions to achieve sustainability. The funding fees will help fund periodic evaluations, which happen every 5 years, develop a strategic action and funding plan to successfully implement those GSP, filling in important data gaps, strongly importantly, as we were just discussing, and then whatever project and management actions that will allow the GSA to achieve sustainability. And then we have this staff note here that there's for a more detailed understanding of benefits and specific benefits tied to each of the project and management actions that are included within the draft cost basis. There's a handout in the packet and that has been printed for the board members. So this is that schedule again. So the fee study, this 5-year fee study period, the colored lines would be the projects that are included in the draft cost basis. And with that, I will pass it back to Catherine to kick us off into the cost basis discussion. Unless Eric has any whispers for us.
Okay, so I think just overall, I just want to assure you that we're not trying to pin you down to something that you can't change later, okay? What we're asking for today is the direction on the cost basis, because then I can give you fee calculations next month based off of that cost basis. You have the opportunity after that to make changes. So if the fee comes out to be at a level that is unsupportable for various reasons, we can talk about different fees. But I need a cost basis upon which to provide the calculations to you. And so that's why we're looking for this direction today. But don't feel like we're trying to trap you into saying this is the level of cost and this is what we're moving forward with, okay? All right. So we have developed 2 cost basis options for your consideration. Indigo's explained the basis behind that. I think I had said earlier that KSN on my team was tasked first with looking at prioritization, ranking, how do these different studies interact, what's the most important things to do in the next 5 years to fill in those data gaps so that you can have a better understanding moving forward what projects you really need to do. So we're really focusing on feasibility, understanding things, all that sort of critical information, strategic plan moving forward, what you really need to do to accomplish sustainability by 2042. Right, so this is the first cost basis. This is what KSN developed, staff has reviewed, and I should have made it a little bit clearer on this slide. I put here the total 5-year cost estimate. This is for PMAs only. This is project management actions only, the cost that you see on this slide. Okay, so If all of those things were completed in the next 5 years, that would be about $5.5 million. If you did receive grant funding for the 2 projects you are seeking the grant funds for right now, that could be reduced to about $3.7 million. Then we looked at a second option with staff, saying, do you really need to do all of those things in the next 5 years? Yes, we had an independent third party look at it and give us their recommendation, but does it really make sense? And so collectively came up with what we've termed a slow start. So the assumption is that the GSA board wants to pursue the GSP implementation at a slower pace over the next 5 years until the economic conditions improve, because again, we're just trying to minimize this fee impact to the customers. So this is the cost basis that collectively, it's a GSA staff consultant, we all are recommending to you. And this slower start would reduce that total cost basis I just said by about $0.6 million. So for the project to management actions, then we're looking at about $4.9 million over the next 5 years, and if those grant funds are received, a little over $3 million. I highly recommend that you don't immediately say, we're going to assume that we are receiving the grants. You have that opportunity. We still have several months before this fee is adopted. If you are awarded the grants at that point of time, the fee amount could be reduced. But until you know that, I highly, strongly recommend that you don't count on those grants in the fee calculations. I have actually gone over this slide before, and I'm going to kind of skip this one because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. Okay. All right, so this is just a graphical illustration now of the PMA costs under that full cost scenario, option 1. Split it between monitoring and reporting type activities, as Indigo showed you in that colorful graph. Those are costs that go on every single year. Those are kind of the unavoidable costs. Then there's the project and management actions on top of that. So you can see fiscal year 2025, about $800,000, and then it does increase up to about $1.5 million a year after that. Slide. Under the slower start, which is option 2, you can see that first year is the same cost because the same things are still needed in fiscal year 2025. It does reduce, though, the total cost in the next 4 years. I just want to review with you again. I know I did talk about this in October. What are all the things that are in the cost basis, which is another term for it is revenue requirement. So when we're doing fee studies, we say revenue requirement, but cost basis, it's the same thing. We're talking about what are all the different costs that have to be supported with this fee. So we just mentioned the GSP implementation costs. We have the monitoring, reporting, and then we have these different studies and programs that might be enacted. But in addition to those costs, we have the operating costs of the agency itself, which includes the general types of costs, legal counsel, county's charges, building a website, maintaining the website, having insurance, administrating the fee each year. And then there are some costs that are really driven by what you do decide to do with your GSP implementation. So the larger projects will incur larger costs by your staff to manage those projects, contracts. Outreach and engagement is a large part of some of these project costs, and things like grant writing. Okay? And then also to keep a prudent reserve. So you want to make sure that you're able to cover your cash flow needs. You want to make sure you're putting, do you want to go to the next slide? You want to make sure you're putting enough aside for some unknowns. Perhaps you call it a rate stabilization fund. if you find yourself in a situation where you have a year that you collected more in fees than you needed to for that year, I would recommend that you pass a resolution, you designate a fund, and you put it aside for a certain particular purpose, so that you are showing good fiscal management. But it is important to have reserves included in that revenue requirement projection. So this is the projection then of truly the total 5-year costs. I'm only showing it for option 2 as this is the recommended option. The budget for this fiscal year is $438,000. The proposed budget for next year would be $1.2 million, and that would increase then to $1.7 million up to $1.8 million in year 5. If you want to look at this on an average annual cost basis, it's about $1.6 million a year. And I provided a little breakdown there on the side of the approximate percentage that would go to different cost categories. So the operating costs, reserves, the DWR reporting, and then these PMA items. So looking at that cost breakdown, about 68% of the projected costs are for those PMA items, about 18% for operating, the remainder for reserves and reporting. I think I'm going to let Indigo hop in here on this, just to talk a little bit about how does this compare with other GSAs and their experience in Sonoma.
Sure. So with requests from the chair, as well as understanding that some of the other directors might like to see how other GSAs compare, we looked at the projected average annual budgets for Petaluma and Sonoma Valley GSAs. It's very hard to compare one GSA to another for a multitude of reasons. There's many different structures and how GSAs have different board setups. There's many different groundwater condition situations, but we felt that Petaluma and Sonoma Valley, besides having personal understanding and deeply of those budgets, I work on developing those budgets under a very different role, but they also felt like the best comparators, having similar agricultural crops, having relatively similar scales of groundwater extraction. And so the projected budgets for those two agencies for the next 3 fiscal years through fiscal year 26-27 is between $1.9 million to $2.1 million a year. So you'll see that the Ukiah Valley projected costs under this option are less than the projected costs under for those two basins, which are similar comparators.
Okay. So in developing then what that initial fee level might be, I looked at the total cost, but also looked at the cash flow and developed some cash reserves criteria to determine then what the fee level would need to be adequate for the 5 years. What I would warn you strongly against is setting a fee in the first year that only covers the costs for the first year. I have experienced this in 2 other GSAs. So from my personal point of view, what I have seen is GSAs that have set their fee level at an unrealistic level because they were receiving grant funding. And so they set it just at what they needed for the next year. But sure enough, a year or 2 later, their costs doubled, some tripled, and now they're in a public outreach difficult type of situation where they're now having to go back out and explain why the fees are going to be so much higher going forward. So the 3 criteria that I'm looking at is first, to have a cash balance that equals about 20% of the total projected costs each year. We received some guidance from that, so we understand that the city of Ukiah has that criteria. Second, that in addition to that cash balance criteria, that the GSA would have 8 months of administrative costs held for cash flow purposes. And the reason for this is that special districts and JPAs that put their fees onto the tax roll, or mostly onto the tax roll, they don't receive any revenues between April and December of the year. So they need to ensure that they can pay the bills between those months. I also have personal experience with Salinas GSA. Last year, they had to take out a line of credit with a bank because they could not meet their cash flow. They were waiting for that December check to come in from the county. And then finally, that you have gross revenues ratio of at least 1.2. This is generally a good practice, good fiscal practice, and something I highly advise that you continue to do. If you ever needed to obtain a loan or even a loan from the state, they will be looking for your gross revenues ratio. Sometimes they look at net, but I think it's okay just to stick with gross for now. Okay? All right, so looking at the year one GSA sustainability fee, as I had said, I think that this should be set at a level that will require relatively small changes over the next few years. So you want to be accounting for inflationary changes and some other relatively minor cost basis changes to meet your sustainability goals. I am assuming in the model that the member contributions cease at the end of fiscal year 2024 this year. And as I had already mentioned, if the grants are awarded before the fee is adopted, certainly the fee can be reduced. So under the two different options, if you look at the no grants column, if you proceeded with option 1, we would be looking at, and I should have a big draft stamp on this slide too, because these are still working numbers, but we're looking at about $1.67 million in your year one cost basis. If you did the slow start, which is the recommended start, that's a $1.55 million cost basis for the fee. And here I'm illustrating the cash balances under this option 2. So it looks like a high cash balance right out the gate. Well, that is a purposeful design. As I said, you want to start out with a fee that you're not having to make major changes to over the next few years. But then you would be drawing down on that cash balance each year to fund the projects. And I do have a table. It's a little hard to see on the screen. It was more really for the packet that you can follow along with that cash balance figure by looking at the table. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the table. I don't really think I should go through it on the presentation today. All right, so I think that was conclusion of the presentation.
It really sucks not having a voice today, but so I hope I can make the clarity I would like to bring. So as Catherine pointed out, you are not locking yourself into anything. All we're doing today is asking for the board to consider the recommended cost basis or a revision of that if we want to discuss that. So that way she has the numbers she needs to develop the fee structure. So when we come back in a month in February, we can look at what that looks like and have further discussions. And the board always has the ability to set what we do. My job, what you hired me to do, is to do my best work to give you the best information possible to make the informed decisions. Ultimately, you guys make the decision of what we do as a GSA, and I go and execute. So I just wanted to make sure I emphasize that, and Indigo and Catherine will be primarily fielding the questions, and if they need me, they will call upon me. Thank you.
Board member questions, comments?
Just kind of come back, you know, it's great. Everything you did there is great. The cash cost basis analysis, I forget what it was called, but the idea of having a reserve and having all that, that's good. I think we should.
Could you lean into the mic just a little bit? You're cutting out a little.
I think that's good, to have that and use that. The only place that I'm still having a problem with is in building this budget is the activities that are not listed here as mandatory. I would love to see this if you delete everything that isn't mandatory. And other than that, I mean, it's just a spreadsheet thing. It should be a little different. And it would get us to the update when we could look at, do we need to throw in there, if anything?
Yeah, so I have kind of two questions. One of them is, well, first of all, comment. I agree with Alan, what he has to say. The other thing is that you showed us a total budget of the other two GSAs. So what are people being charged? You know, what are the categories, and what do individual ag well producers pay?
I can comment on that. In Sonoma County, the county has decided that there are 3 GSAs within the county of Sonoma, and the county of Sonoma has decided that they would like to equalize the fees across all 3 groundwater sustainability agencies. And so the Sonoma County GSAs have chosen extraction-based fees, which may or may not be the pathway that is decided upon in this board by this GSA. It is probably not the recommendation based off of the initial conversations we've had with Hansford as to pathways, along with the public input you heard. So it's really hard to do a comparison there, but because the Santa Rosa Plain is much larger and has much larger extraction, the fee for Santa Rosa Plain is $40 per acre foot of extraction, and the other 2 basins are subsidized to that same rate. Without a subsidy, you would be looking upwards of $140 to $200 an acre foot in the other 2 basins.
So my quick calculations, realizing we're pumping about 7,000 acre feet, is that we're talking about close to $280 an acre foot in fees, or costs, I should say. Am I wrong?
I think it's really important to not jump to conclusions to that type of back of the napkin math for various reasons. Catherine could probably explain why, but based on the preliminary data that we have, I am not seeing numbers that high, just to be honest with you. So it all depends on the structure and how we distribute the costs.
Yes, it very much comes down to the fee structure. So I'm not in a position to share those kinds of figures with you today. I will be in February, but I would like to have the cost basis upon which to show you those results.
Just going with the numbers. I think that what we would like you to do is come back with a budget that shows us the minimum, you know, that basically DWR is going to say, yep, you're taking care of business. And then all the other add-ons beyond that. Right now, I think a lot of us are really having a problem, and I'm just thinking about looking at this at all sorts of different ways, whether it's irrigated acreage, split for the 5,000 acre feet that are pumped to farm, and then thinking about 2,000 acre feet that go into urban use, and it's expensive. You know, just proportionally, the cost of conforming with the GSA regulations as you've laid it out are high. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I feel more comfortable putting our maximum cost basis at like $1 million. It just seems like, I'm looking at this and seeing what seems to me is mandatory and what is not mandatory, but that is a lot more reasonable than that cover because we can either set things based on our expenses or our revenues, and I think we really should be basically putting a cap on what our expenses are going to be. Because one of the things in here, the Western Hills project, I don't even feel that is our project. It shouldn't even be in there, and I'd rather just take it out right now. And some of the well mitigation study, even in the drought, we didn't really have that many wells that did go dry, and so I don't know why we would be planning to fix something that we haven't had a problem with so far, even in severe drought.
Could I just ask Indigo to go back to a slide, and then Eric, yeah, could you go back to the slide that has the cost projection under option 2, and on the side it has a table that shows the operating costs and then reserves and DWR reporting. So actually my eyes aren't good enough to see the numbers. Okay, so if the operating costs, I'm gonna have to get my paper version. My eyes are not good enough. Okay. The operating costs are around $300,000 a year. If you had reserves, and I put in reserves of $100,000 a year, you're up to about $400,000. DWR reporting costs are around $150,000. So, that's around $550,000, and that's without even doing any of the the strategic action plan, any of those other priority PMAs.
Our counsel, Scott Morris, has a comment, so if it, through the chair, if we could
Yes,
direct
Scott,
it to
go
him.
ahead.
Thank you. This is just, we've talked about this in the past, but it's just a reminder to the board that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, but what we need to get done is the fee study. And as Eric mentioned, you're not locked into this as a quote unquote budget. But if my advice is, and it's politically a difficult thing to sell, but the bottom line is it's very difficult to go back later and go, well, we asked for the budget was, and then you're short a little bit. It's much easier for the fee study purposes, and even what may be adopted by the board, to adopt the higher number, and then you can always say this particular year we don't need that amount. But to go back and try to get another 100,000 or whatever it is later on, you have to go through this whole study again and all these options. And so lowering it is from what has been studied and what has been approved is easy. Raising it after it's been approved is much harder. I'm just saying that for strategic purposes for you all to consider.
Indigo, could you please go to the board packet and go to the PMA schedule, or the GSP implementation schedule, or slide 30, actually. That works. Could you zoom in a little bit? So, I know there's a temptation to only want to look at the mandatory costs, but I must strongly caution you to not focus on that. Director Crane, I will come to you next. Thank you. The interconnected surface water groundwater study may be funded by the grant, and if we're going to find out hopefully in February, in a couple weeks, if that's funded by the grant. If it is, great, but if it's not funded by the grant, that study, even though it's not considered mandatory, is still considered a very high priority for two reasons. One, there's data gaps that will be filled, and the model will be updated. Groundwater well inventory program is also a very high priority. As Catherine pointed out from the stakeholder outreach, people have said, we do not have a good understanding of our groundwater well inventory. That is what stakeholder opinion has been. So that is also high priority, because if we don't know the groundwater well wells within the basin, it makes it very challenging to manage groundwater and have our model be accurate. So that's also why it's considered a high priority. Well inventory and registration study goes hand in hand with the groundwater well inventory program. When it comes to the recharge master plan, as Glenn pointed out, for the challenge with the Potter Valley project, we don't have potentially all the storage we need when that goes forward, and if we're getting the diversions from the NERF initiative. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. So the recharge master plan is also a high priority because it will give us an idea of what we can do in prioritizing what's actually needed from this list of recharge projects, and then deciding which is not needed from these projects, so we can revise what we actually do in the last 10 years of implementation. If you are looking to cut and change the slow start even more, what I would focus your attention to potentially considering, so that way Catherine can get the cost basis she needs to move forward, but also giving you guys the opportunity to discuss and consider my proposal as an alternative option here, is if you're going to cut something, I think that we can get away with, and I hope I'm not wrong, with the water supply resiliency study, the voluntary well metering program, and the Western Hills project. If you take those three out, you reduce the cost basis by over $1 million over the 5-year period. And what we can say is that the Western Hills, if that doesn't get grant funded, then we're not interested in helping it, and we can stop there, right? Because the city of Ukiah has said, and Doug, please correct me if I'm wrong, that they would like to pursue that project with the grant funding. Without the grant funding, I think they would like to take a step back and consider their options. I think that would be fair to say. So with that said, the cost basis could be revised to remove the water supply resiliency study, the voluntary well metering program, and the Western Hills project, which may or may not be grant funded. So that's my proposal to you today to consider if $1 million off this total cost is helpful to move forward with this cost basis. That's all I have to say, Director Crane.
Director Crane, do you have a comment too? I know you were queuing.
Yes, right. A couple of points. The city's policy is a 25% reserve, with the idea of maintaining that rather than adding to it each year, other than to meet the 25%, which is seemingly different than the math that we were presented here, in terms of the percentage, and in terms of it being applied to each and every budget as an additional cost. Secondly, it seems like we're really talking about two different things. Those which we consider to be obligations to meet the minimum standard to keep the state from intervening, and those things that we think would be helpful and would like to see done, some of which may want to be done by members of this body. Like the city may want to do something, or some other element within the basin may want to do something, or we might put together a project that involves several of the agencies. I'm thinking of the model of the Northern California Power Agency, which the city of Ukiah is a member of, which is public power for Northern California. And so the city is part owner in a series of generating facilities with other combinations of members of the JPA. And those projects sometimes are done, they're usually led by and NCPA, but the ownership and the costs are borne by those specific members of the JPA that are part of that project. So there's a couple of things that I think could come into play in terms of how we analyze these numbers, identifying what is optional and what is the minimum requirement would certainly help me understand this. And I am curious to know what those numbers do look like, following up on the chair's question of what does this come to an acre foot. And when we spoke about this most recently, that was one of the questions that I asked and said, well, we're not there yet, but I'm curious to know what that looks like. And I've been advocating from the very beginning to spread it over the maximum number of users, the broadest base possible, and to keep it at the minimum we can to stay in compliance. And so it's, I think, been jarring for many, me included, that the numbers being presented are, quote, a worst case, the maximum. And I had a discussion with our manager about the use of the word maximum, because the dollar's not a constant, and that very principle itself, or that very word choice, could bite us later on. But that's a lesser matter. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Crane.
Okay, so we're getting at sort of the end of the meeting here. I think we have to give some direction to our consultants. And are there other comments or questions before we do that?
Well, if it was a direction, one that I would like to see is to parse this down into those parts of what we would like to do and what we think we are absolutely required to do. It's sort of in line with what manager has spoken to about removing some of the elements from the total. But and maybe his list is the perfect list, but I think that approach is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I concur. I think we need to have, here's your baseline, here's what gets you sort of safer in terms of possible regulatory action, and this is the max. So I think that would be very, very helpful for us as we move forward with this, if that's something you can do.
Could I make a very quick interjection?
Sure.
It's very easy for me to run these fee scenarios at different levels. I'm looking for direction on cost basis, but if you wanted to direct me today to say, look, show us what the results are with your proposed fee structure at the slow start, at this start with the yellow lines taken out, at 1 million a year, I can certainly produce those. That is not difficult, and that is not time-consuming to do.
And then also about what's the minimum? What is it the minimum DWR expects for us to be showing progress and improving our plan and being compliant with what they want? Eric.
To answer that question on the minimum that DWR expects, I think it's really important for us to remember that DWR is going to be evaluating our progress based on two things. One, our annual report and what we are saying we're doing and how we're progressing. And two, our next periodic evaluation that's due in 2027, which they're going to look at what we said we're going to do in the GSB and how we've made progress or not made progress towards what we said we're going to do. And so what I've proposed, including everything except for the yellow, is what I am recommending to the board to consider as what I think is comfortable for us to say that that is what will meet the minimum requirements and sufficiently provide DWR with demonstrating progress in a meaningful way. If we don't do these things, I think we're increasing the probability of DWR coming back and saying why and asking questions. And if that happens, we could have in 2027 a GSP that is periodic evaluation that is not approved, which we then have to spend more money to revise. And that is what we want to avoid.
The constant balance of what is the lesser of the evils.
Yes.
And that will, from a regulatory standpoint, most likely change. And the economic realities are probably less than known at this point. So it may live in interesting times.
So this would be the slow start, and we're taking out, we'd amended to take out the yellow.
So what we're proposing is you adopt a cost basis for Catherine to use to develop the fee structure to come back with in February. That includes everything except for the yellow highlighted items, which takes out just over $1 million out of the total. So it goes from 4.8 as the total down to 3.7. Most likely rough, give or take.
And then we would still have a chance, I mean, we would still have to approve any budget in the future anyway.
You would have several opportunities to adjust the fee
To say no,
after that
yeah.
point, regardless of the cost basis that's decided today.
Yeah.
You could decide to have a reduced fee when you're approving a fee resolution. At several points within the fee study process, you could make that decision, and then every year whenever you would pass a rate resolution, you would have that opportunity to reduce.
I feel better, not great, but better.
I wouldn't mind taking a yellow line through the well inventory registration study. Got the transects going in, and that's will give us time, picture of the larger picture of the groundwater. That's what all these little wells will respond to. And if we see trouble, then obviously we need to start looking at it closer. But it's just, do we need to do it today?
Well, we're not deciding to do it today.
No, what I mean
anyway,
is,
but
does
yeah.
it need, I mean, you could put a yellow line through that one too and knock off another.
I'm hesitant on that, Director White, because I think that that's a data gap exercise. That's really important. Can we prolong it further? Probably, but I think it's better to do sooner than later. That's my comment to that.
I mean, my feeling is that the GSA really is kind of, we're an oversight board that's supposed to, we don't have a lot of power, but we're trying to direct things so that we don't hurt for groundwater. And especially not knowing what the future of the Potter Valley project is going to be, but also even if we lose a lot of water or people have to store it, that doesn't mean they're going to immediately just go to groundwater to make up the difference, because there's going to be natural barriers to them doing that anyway. Just because you drill a hole in the ground doesn't mean you're going to hit water and be able to extract it. The cost of compliance and the cost of water very likely are going to drive smaller producers out of business anyway. So, I mean, yeah, it's like even if we lose X amount of water, it doesn't mean we're going to make up the difference from groundwater. And then with some of what I think we can achieve some of the same objectives of protecting groundwater through the well drilling ordinance that's going to happen, which in that case, the well inventory would be important, because then we can try to make it so that most of the wells would be a ministerial permit as long as they check certain boxes. If you have a well that's going to go in, and if it's going to be so many acres and it's going to be underneath a certain threshold and you don't have that many domestic wells around you, the chances of you hurting those domestic wells supply is going to be minimized enough that we can give you a permit to drill your well. But if, you know, if you're going to put in, say, a 200, 500 acre vineyard where there's, you know, 30 or 40 domestic wells around you, well, that is going to be a bigger risk, and that's where we might want to have a discretionary process to allow that kind of use or that. And so that's where we would, I think, want the well inventory.
I think it's going to be important to see our groundwater levels in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Because growers can build reservoirs, fill them in the wintertime. If that groundwater state level stays high, it rains and the natural feeding of that reservoir, underground reservoir, you solve a lot of problems by doing
Well, I guess we do need to give you what you need.
Yeah.
And I don't want to roll this over so that we just push it back. So
I
sounds
think
like
go with the amendment, the slow start with the amendment, taking
the
highlighted items out,
that would be
and then also direct staff to also look at what the minimum is. What would that cost on the, if we only did the mandatory items?
I mean,
To give us a couple more options to look at next time.
We need to know who's going to be getting charged for this. Maybe a parcel one for.
Well, she needs to figure out,
She's looking for the.
she needs to come back with more options for the maximum cost basis, because then that's what we will base the fee off.
If you give me direction on a cost basis, in February, I will provide you with a fee structure proposal and the calculated fees at that level. You will know that you can adjust your fees upwards and downwards based on what you decide you want to fund. But at least then you have a good solid starting point. You've gone through the list, you've wrapped your head around it, and you've made a good start for this fee. And I can show you the results under that cost basis. And then we talk about adjustment if necessary.
So that was my motion. Yep. You want to repeat it, or?
Yeah, so the motion, as I heard, was to move forward with the slow start cost basis while removing the water supply resiliency study, the voluntary well metering program, the Ukiah Western Hills source water protection, and then also for staff to provide a fee assessment with solely mandatory DWR requirements.
Yep.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to give direction to our consultants as described by Indigo. Roll call vote, please.
Director Crane.
Aye.
Director Gaska.
Yes.
Director Todd.
Yes.
Director White.
Yes.
And Chair McCordy.
Yes, and don't forget Director Crane.
And I got Director
Okay,
Crane,
all
and
right.
Director Navarez is absent.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all. I think we're at the end of the meeting at this point, so, thank you for working on this process. Thank you for consultants for understanding what a tough spot we're in, and, we want to do this right, but we're facing the real constraints of the world that we live in, so good luck at your hearing tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. And sorry about my voice.
Yes, we're meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Yep. Go eat some food.
Director White, before